Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in another episode of Palestine Chronicle TV. Um, it's been a few months since we conducted an episode, but this is a very special episode as we are talking to a person who has a great track record of championing issues of human rights and particularly refugee issues around the world. But first, a little bit of context. On May 1st, the mandate of UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Palestine, Michael Link, came to an end. Since then, international human rights and refugee lawyer Francesca Albanese became the new UN human rights envoy. Now, we know that human rights for the occupied Palestinian people have always been the center stage of any relevant discussion or conversation pertaining to Palestine, the Israeli occupation, or the so-called Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Yet little has been done to ensure that the Palestinian human rights are in fact respected. There are reasons for this. My point of view is that the lead reasons is that aside from Israel's impunity, is Washington's blind support for Tel Aviv. Now, the question is there any room for a substantive change to hold Israel accountable and to provide Palestinians with their basic rights as enshrined in international law? Today, we speak with Francesca Albanese, the new UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Palestine. So that in order for us to learn more about her own agenda and to try to understand the mechanisms at work at the UN's most important human rights body. Now, Francesca, if you could start with helping us with a basic definition regarding the role of the UN Special Rapporteur as you see it, and about your own plan to fulfill this role, considering the immense obstacles that faced your predecessors, Michael Link, Richard Falk, John Dugard, only to name a few.
Thank you very much, Ramzy, for me and for giving me an opportunity to speak about the role of the Special Rapporteur that I've just started. Special rapporteurs are independent human rights experts, and their mandate is in essence that of reporting and advising on the human rights, on a human rights situation, either from a thematic or a country-specific perspective. The system of the special rapporteurs is a central element of the United Nations human rights machineries and tries to cover the whole spectrum of rights: civil, cultural, economic, political, and social. While the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situations in the Palestinian territory occupied as of 1967, let's say the Special Rapporteur on UPT is one of the oldest. It was created in 1993. At the moment, there are 55 special procedures. It's called either thematic mandates, or there are 11 country or territorial mandates. And what they do to produce their reports and to provide advice, they undertake country visit, take up individual cases of concern or cases of a structural nature. How do they do that? By sending communications to the concerned states, in which they bring alleged violations to their attention. Conduct thematic studies, expert consultations, and over time, they contribute to develop international human rights standards, they contribute to advocacy and providing advice both on the situation as they read it through their expertise, and how they advise it to overcome the challenges and the lack of implementation of rights. So my responsibility, as my predecessors, will be that of reporting annually to the Human Rights Council and to the General Assembly, and I will do that upholding independence, efficiency, and integrity. Something I would like also to stress is that this mandate is discharged in the expert's personal capacity. So we are not officials of the United Nations in the sense the United Nations does not remunerate us for our functions. And the obstacles in general are many. I mean, human rights in general are an issue that touches on state sensitivity across the globe. States are sensitive to criticism on their human rights performance, and yet it is common to be encouraged to extend cooperations to the special rapporteurs. In the case of the special rapporteurs in the OPT, this has been lacking. Cooperation especially from Israeli authorities, has never been extended either to Michael Link, my immediate predecessor, and his predecessor, Richard Falk. But I would also like to stress I'm the first woman since 1993 to undertake this function, and I'm very proud of it. I'm happy to elaborate on the obstacles if you like, but I wanted to clarify what is the special rapporteur's role first and foremost. So, in terms of challenges and obstacles, the first that comes to my mind, particularly connected to this mandate, is the fact that it's limited. It's limited geographically. It's to the territories that Israel occupied in 1967, so it doesn't extend to Israel. It doesn't extend necessarily to the Palestinian refugees, those in the diaspora. And this is an issue because inalienable rights of the Palestinians belong to the Palestinians as a people.
If you don't mind me, Francesca, interrupting you there for a second, because that was one of the important points we wanted to bring up as well, this whole thing regarding the dates. But before I do so, let me bring in my co-host, Romana Rubeo, who's also the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle, so that we could engage her in this conversation. But back to the issue of dates. Amnesty International, in their February report, in which they dubbed Israel an apartheid state, they were no longer confining themselves to the 1967 borders or the 1967 discussion. They were talking about 1948, which is kind of like relatively new phenomenon to actually bring up all of that. Yet your mandate is kind of more or less is relevant to the 1967. Is this a correct understanding, and how do you navigate this issue?
I feel that in a way this will be, for me, less of an obstacle now than it has been for my predecessors, because now there is a commission of inquiry which was appointed by the Human Rights Council in last year after the tragic events of May 2021. And this commission is mandated to look at the root causes which are foundational in the Israel-Palestine conflict, as it's called. And so the commission will not be limited territorially to the OPT and has quite a broad mandate. So looking at the root causes, as it's increasingly acknowledged by the human rights community, looking at the situation of the Palestinians, let's say, under Israeli occupation, is necessary because some of the reality experienced by the Palestinians today cannot be understood if the past is forgotten, is neglected. And of course, I will investigate and I will report what has happened, the violations that have taken place as of 1967. But I'm not prevented from relying or from referring to history and referring to facts that are well established, well documented, both by the United Nations and historians, if and to the extent they are necessary to explain the current reality. which includes dispossession, the territorial dispossession, and displacement and other violations.
Thank you, Francesca. Romana?
Francesca, I'm very happy to talk to you tonight. And Ramzy mentioned the February report issued by Amnesty International about apartheid, but also former UN Special Rapporteur Michael Lynk ended his mandate with a crucial report in which he answered a critical question: is Israel an apartheid state? And after analyzing the issue from a legal and historic point of view, Link concludes that the following: the political system of entrenched rule in the occupied Palestinian territory satisfies the prevailing evidentiary standard for the existence of apartheid. This conclusion was also reached by human rights groups such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, but also the Israeli B'Tselem. So why do you think it took so long for this conclusion to be achieved, considering the historic evidence of racial segregation in Palestine, which accompanied the very inception of the State of Israel? And how important is this conclusion now, anyway?
Well, it depends to whom you speak, because the Palestinians have, since the very beginning of the realization of the Jewish migration toward Palestine, which started at the end of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, it's not a recent phenomenon. I mean, the question of Palestine certainly doesn't start in 1948. So there has been an element of discriminations toward what were then the Arabs of Palestine since the very beginning of the migration, Jewish migration toward Palestine. So let me go back in history. As you asked me why this has been tolerated, this has not been an issue picked up earlier. As I said, the Palestinians have always pointed to this, but I don't think that it was only the Palestinians who were aware that there were violations committed against the Arabs of Palestine pre-1948. Let's refer to the Palestinians for simplicity. There has been as Victor Catan says, a convergence of anti-Semitism and colonialism at the very origins of the question of Palestine, and an intersection between the Jewish question and the Palestinian question, as other scholars underscore. So when the decision to partition Palestine in 1947 was taken, and so it was decided to divide the territory between the majority of the indigenous population and the minority of mainly Jewish migrants from Europe, because this is the reality. Colonialism was still in full steam. We were at the height of colonialism, so the divided impera toward the people from the south was not seen as a problematic issue. I mean, and there is a beautiful book which documents what was the mentality especially in the international community of the time. It was not problematic to create a territorial entity where an indigenous people already existed, and there was a presence of a Jewish presence in Palestine for sure, but it was not the majority. While the majority of the population came through migration, following, and this is the other element, following anti-Semitism in Europe. Anti-Semitism has always been a tragic feature of European history and a European problem that eventually parts of the Zionist movement decided to resolve by creating a nation state somewhere, and the nation state somewhere became Palestine. So there was anti-Semitism, colonialism that justified it somewhat, and then it was clear that the perception that the rights of self-determination from what emergence from the UN document, for example, it was clear that the self-determination of the Arabs of Palestine was being somewhat sacrificed. But it was a compromise solution in order to resolve the problem that Europe had caused to its Jewish population. The Holocaust, that had the tragedy that the Holocaust represented for the Jewish people, has created a heightened sensitivity toward anything that concerns the state of Israel as well. For a long time, criticizing Israel, and even today, was seen and is seen as unacceptable because of the legitimate regret that the Europeans, including myself as a European, have. This is unconscionable and should have never happened. At the same time, should not be justified by imposing suffering on another population, because this is what happened 70 years ago. And so why today? I think that the situation as of the constraint over the compression of the rights of the Palestinians has reached a point now that is unprecedented. The situation has never been particularly easy for the Palestinians living under occupation since 1967, after being under Egyptian rule in Gaza, and after a Jordanian de facto annexation regime. And so as of after the second Intifada, things have gone worse and worse. The matrix of control has tightened around the life of the Palestinians, and there is a sense of physical and psychological imprisonment. Now it's more evident the discriminatory system that Israel has gradually put in place, and it's clear that there is a creeping annexation ongoing. So the facts on the ground have led to a reality that seems to be immutable. So what are the prospects for the so much wanted two-state solution that the international community continuously invoked? So there is this realization that Israel crossed the red line of what is legal and what is acceptable. But much more discussion is needed, in my view, Romana, to make sure that the policymakers absorb what the current reality as presented by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, B'Tselem, Al-Haq, other Palestinian organizations, and last but not least, Professor Michael Link, my distinguished predecessor in the role of Special Rapporteur on the OPT. That I don't think that that political actors have absorbed the importance and the gravity of what these acute observers are putting in evidence.
Well, let me take this a step further, Francesca, because from a Palestinian point of view, there is always this feeling of, well, we have always been doing this. We have been always appealing to the international community to come to the rescue. We've always been referencing international law to build a case against Israeli military occupation and now apartheid. But very little has actually resulted from all of this. If there's one changing fact, if there's one unchanging fact, rather, in Israel's behavior towards the Palestinians and other Arab countries, is the fact that Israel was never held accountable in any tangible, meaningful way by the international community. Even such horrific events as the Gaza wars, the events in May, notwithstanding, the killing of thousands there throughout the years, starting 2008-9, were still not enough to change this stifling paradigm. Now, first, why do you think this is the case? And do you think that the current international institutions have the power to change this reality in any way? I know it's a loaded question, but I think it's a question on the minds of many, many Palestinians and their friends as well.
It's a loaded question because the answer is not in the legal system. the way, as a scholar, as a researcher, as a lawyer, the way I've approached the question of Palestine is through the situation of Palestinian refugees, first and foremost, which I will not, I mean, those who have been displaced from what was British Mandate Palestine until 1948. I will not be able to cover this, but through the work of the mandate. But this has enlightened very well the reality that the international law has never been an issue. International law has always been on the side of the Palestinians from the very beginning. In fact, since 1922, had international law been applied as it stood back in time and as it has evolved, you and I will not be talking today about this. So the issue is one of political decision. And so if you ask, as Victor, once again, let me quote Victor Catan, which is always one of my most appreciated sources of reference when it comes to the Middle East. But he says the situation in the Middle East, the law has always, justice has always been close to international law has always been closer to politics than to justice. This is partially correct in my view, in the sense that it's for political convenience that the law has been rendered ineffective, has been kept in abeyance, has not been fully enforced. So has the international community the power to change this? Yes, of course. Does it have the will to do that? It doesn't seem to be so. And as Michael Link in his previous report, the one he submitted to the General Assembly last year, pointed out, it's the inaction of the international community, and particularly certain states or certain groups of states, that is enabling Israel's action, and it has allowed Israel to morph into an ossified system, which no serious human rights actor today refrain from calling apartheid, because there is an established structure wanting to maintain domination of one group over another, and which is turning into systematically oppressing the other. So can it be changed? Yes. I believe the human rights machinery and the human rights law remain essential to remind everyone of the perimeter between the legal and illegal, between what is possible and what is not possible, and between what is negotiable and what should be not. So.
Thank you for that, Francesca. Romana?
And Francesca, of course, in what you were saying, Palestinians are not passive actors in all of this. So how do you think that the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and other groups can be involved in the conversation on human rights, as far as holding Israel accountable and generating the needed support to achieve basic human rights for their people?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to comment on how they can be involved in a political discussion, but that concerns the future of their people. But what I can say is that now, if you look at the situation of experience on an everyday basis by Palestinians in the OPT, in Gaza under blockade, and in East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank strangled by an ever-tightening occupation and system of control, it's fundamental that the Palestinians have some sense of protection. And again, this is something I will need to investigate, and in order to also to get a better understanding of the situation, because what I've seen in recent years is that there is a compression, a shrinking of the space available to Palestinians on the one hand, attributable to the occupation and the apartheid system that it has been the vehicle for. The occupation has been the vehicle for. On the other hand, there are also violations of human rights committed by Palestinian authorities. So this is where I think it's their responsibility to make sure that their people enjoy the basic fundamental rights they are entitled to. Whatever is in their control should be delivered in a way that meets the needs and the rights of the Palestinians. I'm not quite sure this is the case right now. And to mention a case, I mean, the space for civil society has been shrinking, and there have been cases of repression that are not, cannot be ignored.
Absolutely, Francesca. And at the Palestine Chronicle, we have been reporting on this a lot recently about this repression that's happening within the spaces that are relatively controlled by the Palestinian Authority, whether it's linked directly to the Israeli occupation or independent from it. That too has to be highlighted and brought to the fore as well. I know that our time is almost over, Francesca, but we are going to be slightly greedy here and ask you one last question. You have already touched on many aspects of this, but if you are to summarize your priorities in your 6-year term as the UN Special Envoy in Palestine, Human Rights Envoy in Palestine, what would they be?
It's a matter of content and process. I often say that I feel really proud of taking over from my colleague, who has been an extraordinary rapporteur. And what is visible, what is seen, what is publicly known of his work is just part and parcel of it. So I want to continue with his rigor, his wisdom, and his commitment to human rights in reporting, and also choosing to report not only on incidents that take human rights violations or violations of international law that occur during the reporting time, but also taking the opportunity to focus on certain themes, as he has done, because eventually these also contribute to advance both the interpretation and the application of given legal standards, and helps understand the reality on the ground. Think of his work on defining the occupation having crossed the red line of legality. This is something no other, surely no one else in the UN had done before. I want to continue this kind of path-breaking work, but also take it into account where the debate is now. Apartheid. Everyone is talking about apartheid, but there is a context to be given to this discourse, which is the first and foremost right that is being violated for the Palestinian people is the right of self-determination. This is an issue that the Palestinians do not need to wait until they demonstrate to be able or to be capable to negotiate in order to enjoy. This is a right at immediate execution, at immediate realization. So I want to start from this, and then look at some of the practices that in my view, have become more vicious in Palestine, like arrest and detention, especially how it impacts minors and how violence impacts the youth in the OPT. And when I say the youth, is both those who are confronted, because again, I think, as I've often said, the occupation and an unlawful occupation which has turned into apartheid is corrosive and corruptive also for the hands which deliver it. And I'm referring to youth who are enforcing this regime on the ground. I mean, it's dehumanizing for them as well. And this issue should be better unpacked and explained. Eventually, this is something that has not been fully touched upon. And also another issue that I think I will be able to do is to look at the other part of the displacement that started to occur in the 1967. It is the refugees from 1967, because they are the most discriminated of all Palestinian refugees. So these are some of the issues that I want to tackle, together with the question of countering terrorism in Palestine, in the occupied Palestinian territories. What does it mean, and how does it trickle down in terms of respect for people's basic rights, and again, the protecting human rights defenders first and foremost, because they are essential to not only to the communities and for the services they provide, but for the very existence of the rule of law system and the very preservation of the rule of law system in the OPT.
Thank you very much, Francesca. We've had the pleasure of actually talking to Professor Richard Falk in the past, and hopefully we can bring Mr. Michael Link on the show at one point in the future. Thank you, Francesca, for all the work that you have already done, for all this incredible mission that is awaiting you, and for being patient with us today and taking the time to speak with us. To our readers at home, those who are listening to us right now, please make sure that you share this video with your networks on social media. And we'll be back hopefully soon with another Palestine Chronicle TV program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.